everyone. I'm so glad to have everyone here today. We are having a panel conversation for the Northwest Film Festival about queer representation in the media. And so I'm going to have everyone go around and introduce themselves. My name is Carmen Rivera. I'm the host of Converse. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a member of the BeautyBoiz Collective.
Hi, I'm Raja McConan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a filmmaker here in Seattle. I work in music videos and VJ work and everything in between. I've loved the film forum forever. And yeah, something else.
Hi, I'm Bree Patton. I'm with BeautyBoiz. I've been with BeautyBoiz for a few years now. I'm a videographer and a photographer on the side as well. My hopes are to continue in cinematography, and I contributed to the Northwest Film Forum this year by helping produce the BeautyBoiz segment we all got to see today. Awesome. And my pronouns are she, they, sorry.
Hello, hello, hello. My name's Henry, AKA Kimber Shade, AKA the baddest bitch. My pronouns are, I accept anything that is respectful because I am fluid in who I am. I am with the BeautyBoiz Collective, and tonight you saw me as the host of this production.
Hey everyone, Wesley Fruget. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the executive director of BeautyBoiz. Helped produce what you just saw, and I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm so happy you all are here. And so we're just going to kick it right off with my first question for all of you. What is your first memory of LGBTQ representation in the media? And could you describe it and how it impacted you?
Well, for me, I guess I would say the first media representation I saw was back when I was a kid in New York. I saw a lot of advertisement for Rent, and one of my mom's friends was a Rent head who would go and wait for the roulette kind of tickets that would come at the end. And so I was curious as to what it was. The only musicals that I really knew about was Cats, just because it'd been on forever and it was weird. So she gave me a little summary, and it definitely at the time it was these people they're queer, and they didn't use that language, of course, but and there's AIDS and all this shit. And so I was it was a little scary for me as a kid, but at the same time it was cool to have that representation and an early introduction to that kind of stuff.
I would say for me, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey for the first 9 years of my life, and the first queer representation that I saw would be from In Living Color, the Wayans brothers when they did their effeminate skits. What was it, In a Circle? That is what I would say would be the thing that impacted me first. And I didn't even know what gay was, nor did my family really talk about what gay was, but I knew that they were different. It impacted me because that's a lot of what My Funny is from the early 90s sitcoms. Gay representation is how I see my character, which oftentimes is problematic, but it's just something that I relate to because that's something that I saw when I grew up.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, Henry, not having the language to really describe what you're relating to in media. And I was a person who did not come out until I believe I was 20 or almost 21. So for a long time, I didn't even know anything about LGBTQ community or that I even was a part of it. And I remember my first memory of LGBTQ representation was actually Mulan. And I'm going to explain that because I remember in daycare in first grade, we got to pick movies to watch when you were one of the good kids. So I was one of the good kids a lot. And I always picked Mulan as a movie to watch at the daycare. And I recall now that I have the language and understanding of my identity that I was relating to the play with gender and the, you know, reflection song, like just not really feeling at peace or connected to my body or who I was. And even though Mulan isn't in itself inherently an LGBTQ movie, because we don't have that much media that reflects our true stories, I found myself drawn to elements of queerness within that story. And that was probably my first or earliest memory of like feeling a way about a media that I didn't have the language to understand.
Wow. Yeah, I grew up in Texas, homeschooled, very, very conservative. And I guess I give like two answers. The first was actually like Olympic ice skating. Like the figure skating, the men's figure skating. I was like, oh my God, yes, this is everything. And I think my mom was just like, shut it down. Absolutely cannot watch this. And she actually, I remember very clearly, she was like, only faggots do that. And then a little bit later in my life, Will and Grace premiered. And I do remember sneaking in my bedroom watching that and just being very like resonating a lot with Jack and just that kind of like that comedy like Henry was talking about, like that sort of like problematic comedy. And then also the relationship between people seeing that in me and being like, oh, Wesley, you're so funny, do it, pretend to be Jack, and getting tired of that. Like, dance, monkey, dance. Yeah, so I'd say both of those.
Wow, those are some really like impactful experiences from your mother's reaction to Brie. I never thought of Mulan like that. So I love that you just opened my eyes to that, but that's totally spot on, everything you just said. Mulan was also like my favorite Disney princess and like movie growing up. And now I'm just like, light bulb. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. My next question is, you know, we've really seen queer displays of affection change from like non-existent in like mainstream media to like very risque. How would you describe the portrayal of queer love today and how it's kind of progressed in our lifetime?
Well, I would say that we have really seen a lot of progression from like just non-existence, like code era film where like you can't show any sort of queer representation and get distribution in the States. And like through the later 20th century, you see a lot more of it opening up, but the representation, like just like we've been saying, wasn't always like good representation. It was often problematic and stuff. And I feel like we're still like just out of the risque phase. Like it wasn't that long ago that we had stuff like Wedding Crashers where like large chunks of that are just like gay jokes that are very dated. Actually, that whole movie is extremely dated. So yeah, but we are seeing more and more like good representation, and like we're seeing lots of queer characters in TV shows and film. And at times I find some of it problematic, the representation. Like far too often the gay characters have their storyline based around Grindr or something. And so yeah, I feel like we've made a lot of progress, but we're not there yet.
So how I would describe where we're at now with the portrayal of gay affection and love is we're more in an open space. So I think that for me, the progression went from seeing a white gay man, getting used to that. Now we're in a phase today where we can see two Black men raise a daughter and do their hair and it's natural, or it's something that isn't out of the blue. So I do appreciate the progress that has come in that aspect. I think that with any time period, there's going to be things that are problematic as when you're innovating the things that's what gets dropped off. But for me, and just in my lifetime, I've seen it go from a taboo place of, oh my gosh, when Christina Aguilera's video Beautiful came out and the boys kissing at the end, that got an X rating and almost got taken down everywhere and censored and all of that just because of that kiss at the end, to now, you know, we have a palette by Jeffree Star called Orgy. You know, so I think that we've come a long way in acceptance in sexuality and just people's overall, it's like almost like Woodstock happened again, free love. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, in terms of affection, it is quite interesting, right, to think about two women kissing on screen being so taboo, even when our parents were our age, and now you can get like, you know, a whole explicit scene out of a show or a film. And it kind of reminds me of like, have y'all seen the meme going around where we must sexualize the post office to save it? Have y'all seen that? Yeah. I just feel like queer LGBTQ love and representation in media is kind of sitting at that corner as well. It's like, even though our identities have been hypersexualized for so long and we've only been able to really interact in very sexualized spaces, it's like we have to be hypersexualized even further still within media to be like acceptable and digestible to like cis audiences. Like, look, we can be like sexual and fun, and that's like an acceptable aspect of our queer identities, but it's nowhere near enough of it, right? And I just find it interesting that we continue to find ourselves there, being sexualized continuously and in different ways over and over. But I am hopeful as we see more shows written and produced and directed by people of color, LGBTQ people, leads starring LGBTQ people, that you know, sexualization can move more from performative to like telling really authentic, beautiful stories.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think, you know, I think we have seen a massive, massive shift. I mean, you know, talking about Will and Grace earlier, the first same-sex kiss on primetime television was on that program, and even the way that it happened, it had to be in a non-romantic way for it to get by. And then, of course, all the stuff that happened to Ellen and her show when she came out. And then we remember the VMAs between Madonna and Britney and all of that. And now we have, you know, shows like Transparent, I think of Sense8 on Netflix, you know, and I think both of those shows, even for me as a queer person, were pretty transformative in how they explored gender. And I know that there have been, you know, aspects of both of those shows, specifically with Transparent, that have been rightfully criticized, I think. And I still think that, I think that things can be problematic or not perfect and still have a huge impact in progressing our culture.
I agree with a lot of what you all have said. It really does seem we've gone from like one end of the spectrum to the other, with from not being represented at all in mainstream media in terms of intimacy and queer love to almost that overrepresentation and hypersexualization. I agree with Brie, especially when I think of like the L word before and now, and how hypersexualized the characters are. And the ending from like the reintroduction or the reboot or whatever they did upset me so much, because they just didn't seem like healthy queer relationships to me. And I want to see healthy queer relationships, healthy queer love in my queer narrative. And so I just resonate with a lot of what you all shared. So thank you. My next question is, can you describe your view of queer representation in mainstream media versus non-mainstream media? And, you know, if you could just share like notable portrayals of LGBTQ people that have really impacted you in either one of those areas.
Yeah, Well, I would say today we see a lot more and a lot more authentic representation in the non-mainstream media, like where mainstream media is just starting to feel comfortable uh, displaying queer affection, even from a sexual or romantic side. In non-mainstream media, we're seeing like actual queer voices um, like telling their own stories, and like still like the representation isn't where I would like it to be. Like even in non-mainstream media, like YouTube streamers and whatnot, like you see like the ones who get sponsorships and whatnot who are queer often focus on things like makeup or like the queer experience and whatnot. And I would just like to see the more of the full spectrum of life represented as a queer person. And so more like, I don't know, just like the everyday life, the small things, you know.
Um, so this is so hard because I fall on that end of the spectrum where I do the makeup and I am that sort of person.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I like it,
Yeah.
that's great. It's good progress and stuff. I love it. I mean, I just wish that there was a broader spectrum. We need folks like you, and it's great that it's happening. And you guys are the ones who are getting sponsorships and whatnot
Right.
when it comes to streaming.
Exactly. So I'll address that and then I'll address the question. When it comes to YouTube and those sorts of platforms, they're open and accessible by everyone. And if the people who decide to get on there, who decide to put themselves out there, are into makeup and that's what they're into and that's what the public responds to, I don't think that they should really be at fault for talking about makeup on their channels or using that platform as an avenue. I am a Black gay man, and when I type in Black gay creators into YouTube, nothing comes up, or hardly anything comes up. And what does come up are people that respond to makeup and whatnot. So I would push back and challenge all of the young Black influencers out there who have any sort of talent to get on YouTube and to actually show what they are doing. Because if I can hardly find makeup people to identify with, just imagine how creators who do music, who all of these other things, they're not out there. So I challenge you to actually create a YouTube channel and to put that out there if that's what you want to see, because it's all based on algorithms. And then just to get back to the question, mainstream versus non-mainstream. So I'm a drag queen as well. And one of the biggest things that I love about the non-mainstream is we kind of dictate the culture. So if you think of like the ball scene was created because in 1968, white queer culture was not allowing Black, POC, and trans people in. So we created the ball scene in order to respond. And through the evolution of the years, the ball scene has dictated dance, it's dictated music, it's dictated a lot of culture that the mainstream media has grabbed from and have, I don't want to say stolen, but reinvented, especially with like the introduction of Vogue and Madonna. Like, she didn't come up with that. That was already an established culture for at least a decade before she, quote unquote, put it on the map. So the way that those things affect me is that I like to always dig deeper. Like when something comes out mainstream and it's trendy, I like to find the source of where that actually came from. One of my biggest people that I respond to is Jonte. He's a dancer and a choreographer from here in Portland, Oregon. He actually choreographed the Single Ladies video for Beyonce. And what he did was he showcased a style of voguing and majorette that then became huge, you know? So I think it's all a symbiotic relationship. And I think that, you know, queer and gay culture really impacts mainstream. And I think that without the underlying underground movement, you wouldn't have that trend or anything that's going on today.
Yeah, that's really excellent, because I think that's something that kind of gets kind of pushed away. We're like, why do we not feel satisfied with the LGBTQ representation that we're currently seeing, even though it has made leaps and bounds, and we have amazing representation through Pose, or, you know, these larger brands doing campaigns with people like Chella Man and India Moore and, you know, Calvin Klein, all these brands diversifying and opening up. And I think a huge part of that question, the answer lies in the whitewashing of, you know, Black and brown culture that then becomes mainstream. And then we feel and sense and see the lack of authenticity from what we're receiving through the mainstream media, because we know that it's just our culture being kind of like converted to something more acceptable for them. And so I think a lot of the times when we're talking about, you know, wanting more robust representation of LGBTQ media, we're also talking about more LGBTQ writers, more LGBTQ directors, more LGBTQ lead actors, more of everything behind the scenes, because that's how the stories get made. If we continue to only have media made by predominantly white casts and, you know, production teams, they're going to take what creativity they find, which usually comes from us anyway, and then turn it into something that works for their narrative. So we have to get more narrative creators into the picture. Even in the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report for 2020, something like 1.5 directors are directors of color, and, you know, 1.5% of those out of 10, so 1.5 out of 10 are like directors of color or women. You know, less than 3 out of 10 are writers, are people of color. And that's not even talking about the LGBTQ statistics. So, you know, it's like our representation behind the scenes needs to be increased. And so I find a lot of inspiration from younger artists who are using social media and globalization as a way to connect with other creatives. And then they're, you know, getting their visions and their stories told by these bigger brands because they're finally having a place of platform. So some of those artists for me are Chella Man, India Moore, Michaela Cole, you know, Quill Lemons. All these people are creating queer art with other queer artists, and for the most part moving pretty independently and just getting seen for connecting with each other. So I think if we can continue to connect ourselves with other queer artists, create together, tell our stories, you know, get our visions all united, so to speak, we can get the representation in media that we deserve because it will have been created by us.
I love that. I love what everyone's been talking about. You know, I think in a lot of ways, the media landscape has been blended so much. And it's kind of hard now to identify, you know, mainstream. I almost think like some YouTube stars are mainstream, to be honest. But, you know, we have, you know, it just like thinking about drag, right? Obviously we have Drag Race, which is now mainstream. You know, primarily focused on cis males doing very traditional, like, female impersonation drag. And I kind of think of BeautyBoiz as like part of the non-mainstream media. And I think if you're, when I think about the model and what makes the collective so powerful, it's this idea of exactly what Bree was talking about, which is empowering people to tell their own stories. And it's also this idea of elevating, like, right, we can raise all together. So if we're actually providing like production training skills and opportunities to be showcased with the Northwest Film Forum, stuff like this, that hopefully it can actually launch careers to the next level, so that hopefully, you know, Bree, Raja, Henry, Carmen, hopefully you all are going to be part of and shaping the future of mainstream media. And that's what's really exciting to me about BeautyBoiz, to bring it home to the brand.
I love that, because here's hoping, right? I love what Henry said about YouTube. And, you know, YouTube can be mainstream. You know, we have queer representation on there with millions of followers. And that's why, you know, this this podcast is not only available on all like podcasts, but also on YouTube. So you can watch us, you can see us. And again, it's a free platform. It's that like you want to make it, like challenge yourself to put that queer representation in everyday life, like Raja said. I really resonate with that. And that was one of the reasons I want to launch this and do this, because I don't see myself in mainstream queer media. The closest queer character I have identified with is Bette Porter, and that's also a little problematic. So it's like, what do we have, right? And I love Bree's points to just like, who are our writers, our directors, our producers, like having that representation as well. And so, I mean, this conversation hopefully just sparks so much more, right? And to move on, in your opinion, you kind of touch on what we just talked about a little bit. I think I know some answers here, but I want to hear, is there a disproportionate representation of white LGBTQ people in the media in comparison to their BIPOC counterparts? And how does that intersection of race and queerness influence the portrayals of LGBTQ media or people in the media today?
Yeah, for me, this really ties into the last question, and we see far fewer like portrayals of intersectionality in film and other media than like true like white traditional more conformative LGBT kind of situations. And like often when we do have a more intersectional story, it focuses, in my opinion, far too much on the suffering of the experience. And yes, the suffering is a large, it plays into your role in society a lot, but I would just like to see a wider variety of stories, including like Black trans people and things like that. Like you look at Euphoria on HBO, and you have a pretty like classic coming of age story for the trans character in that show, while like the biggest source of Black trans visibility right now is Pose, which focuses a lot on the suffering as well as the ways that we found ways around all of that. But like I would just like to see more of the like coming of age story, and like I don't know, like if just in general representation, like it could be any kind of story that can have a trans character as a main character, or more any kind of intersectionality. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm at with that.
So this question always is like difficult for me because there's more white people. So of course there's going to be more white representation. Is it disproportionate? Yes, because there's more of them. Also, I think that this goes back into what Bree was saying earlier with more women directors, with more gay women directors, we're seeing a major shift. Sense8 was directed by a lesbian, white woman, I believe, and Lena Waithe just put out 4 or 5 different movies, and the whole feeling and the whole way that they told the story, those 2 women tell those stories, is just completely different. I think what we're seeing is a shift from the directors to the good old boys, and it's telling the story from a white cisgendered male perspective. Like if you think about that, how would a gang of boys talk about a gay person, you know, just amongst themselves, is how we were seeing the media and the gay portrayals in the past. And now we're seeing a more compassionate, loving, kind, affectionate, not just drug users, prostitutes, that sort of thing. We're seeing the other side of that story because I think that women know how to remove themselves from the situation and don't put their insecurities into the jokes, if that makes sense. I think that where a lot of in the past where the jokes came from was people's insecurities to gay culture. And then also I wanted to touch on the intersection of queerness and race. So being, I think one of the best examples of this is Medea. So Tyler Perry is a straight male, but he plays a character, Medea, who is a drag queen. And so I think that when it comes to being Black and being gay, I think that intersection happens, and it's always a joke and it's always funny. And that's a way for the Black culture to be able to take it a little bit more, a little less seriously, if that makes sense. I don't know if any of this is making any sense to anyone.
No, it actually, I want to interject because it does make sense to me. Because like queerness in like Latin culture is not talked about. It's just not discussed. I remember my father being like, you know, you're not going to tell the family in Puerto Rico until, just because it's not worth stressing them out, right? It's just, we don't talk about it. They all knew, we just didn't talk about it. And I think to make light of that, we make jokes, we make it fun, and that is what lightens up the heaviness of fear behind the queerness in the BIPOC community, right? From you know, that generational trauma. So it does make sense. I do appreciate that.
Okay, and so with that said, that is why there's a disproportion in the representation, because as Black POC, we go through a whole different struggle of having to hide that from our families as well. Not that our white counterparts don't have to do that, but the acceptance in Black and POC culture of gayness is non-existent. You know, if we go outside of the US and we talk about these Black or these POC places, you know, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, these are places where gay people are taken into the streets, beaten, and murdered. So I also feel like that contributes to the disproportion of what we see as representation. Just even me, myself, I didn't come out of the closet until I was also 18. And then I didn't become a drag queen until I was like 23-ish, 22-ish. And that was because of how that intersection of being Black and viewing what gay is. The first thing that I said to my mom, or my mom said to me after I told her that I was gay, she said, just please don't wear a dress. So it's like, it's that, balancing that.
I agree with all of that. And I want to take it almost a step further because, you know, yes, our experiences tend to be more like turned into jokes than white LGBTQ storylines do, or are focused on like pain, right? But also, there's something even more insidious that I've noticed happening as our LGBTQ community is more accepted in media, and it's colorism. And I particularly find myself noticing colorism continually prevailing as we make all these steps forward with LGBTQ rights and representation. A lot of the characters that we see introduced are, for the most part, you know, paper bag challenge passing, or at the least conventionally beautiful and symmetrical in their features, you know. So we still see a prevalence of these European beauty standards and colorism, like somehow making its way through time with us as we're trying to shed these things and say, look, we're all beautiful, our queerness, our LGBTQ stories matter for what they are, and yet they're still getting packaged in these like European boxes almost. I would love to see BIPOC LGBTQ representation change over the near future, heavily in the realm of colorism. I want to see dark skin on screen. I want to see dark skin leads doing something other than being like, you know, a spy or the tank character, or, you know, someone who's supposed to be like really strong. You know, I want to see those more complex stories with darker skin, or, you know, different shades of brown. Like, let's do it. And that's where I find myself frustrated with white representation versus BIPOC representation. It seems like white people stories get told no matter what they look like, or, you know, who their character is. It can be a boring girl living in the middle of nowhere, or a city kid. Like, they get their stories told no matter what. And then we have our brown stories finally being told, and our brown and Black stories finally being told, and they're still being done through a colorism lens. So it's still just light-skinned brown people, and it's still just pretty brown people and pretty dark-skinned people. And I just want to see us shed those beauty standards and create things that really reflect who we all are.
Wow. Yeah, thank you, everyone. That was really incredible to hear. I really think that the issues that we're hearing from this panel really, to me, it's highlighting why representation, not just on the screen, not just in the writer room, not just on the director, like representation on every level that's how we're going to advance forward. That's how we're going to see different body types and different skin colors and different stories. That's how it's going to happen. And, you know, there's been a million articles written about how white this industry is. And, you know, if you don't know, like Bree was sharing a few of the statistics with you, but like literally just Google it. And I also want to talk a little bit about gender, which Henry was bringing up, you know, like female directors and how important it is. You know, I think one of the things that happens a lot in white cis gay culture is just like extreme misogyny. And I think it's high time that we do a little bit of reflection on that and start welcoming women to the table.
And trans folk. I want to see, I mean, and I want to see like, and I want to see like non-binary trans folk. I just want to see, like Bree said, the whole spectrum. I want to see it all. And I like agree with a lot of what you said. I really appreciated your point, Henry, on Medea and the portrayal of that. And just the overall just prevalence of colorism like Bree was talking about. So thank you. My next question is why is queer or BIPOC representation so important in the media?
Like everyone else has been saying as well, the more representation we get, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera, the folks writing the stories, the folks turning something from words into a visual story, the more representation we get there, the more authentic the stories will be. And that's really important because we shouldn't have to rely on stereotypes as our only form of representation, or like being the butt of the joke and whatnot. And even when things have been opening up, we're, like we've been saying, seeing far more like white folks like telling our story, and it just doesn't ring genuine. So having folks on every step of the process is crucially important, in my opinion.
I think that the representation is the most important for the youth that are coming up. When the movie Moonlight came out, it moved me because I knew that the younger generation would be taken care of, if that makes sense. When the way that I grew up, you know, it wasn't like we didn't talk about gay, it wasn't a thing. And so the options for me as a youth in being gay were very limited. And now, because of the representation, it puts a humanity to who gay people are. And so we're much more relatable because of these movies and these media, the media that has given us a kind of like a face almost to not just being the stereotype. So again, movies like Moonlight, they just came out with the movie Green Book, which if you notice, again, this is the intersectionality of being Black and gay. These are not movies that are promoted as gay LGBTQ movies, but they are exactly that. So I think it's important for just as a culture and for us to be able to grow, for us to be able to have that representation that is more than just the stereotype, is just very important for the younger generation.
Yeah, I think we're all speaking for our inner children here, kind of like that yearning that never quite got satisfied to really see a good reflection of yourself. And I think representation is important because it gives us an ability to not have to search for ourselves in stories and imagery that was never made for us or made to reflect us. So when we have true authentic representation, we now have the ability to create language, which can then create a conversation and, you know, learning about ourselves and our children in our communities as we watch them grow up. They have these amazing tools to be able to speak about everything that they are experiencing from a much younger age, from being, 5 years old, 6 years old. So having representation, I think, gives us that ability to find ourselves faster, more authentically, and with the proper language to express ourselves to the world.
Yes to all of that. I mean, I think about, especially people that are like growing up like in isolated places or like smaller towns, where you might be one of the only, how important it is to have that lifeline. And I also think that there's an aspect of representation in the media, which is it's how we learn ourselves, actually, and it's how we progress as a culture. I think about trans characters in the media and what they might be going through, and how that builds empathy and understanding, and it takes that burden off of our trans neighbors and family members to have to sit down and walk you through every single fucking thing. It's like, you know what, just turn on your television and watch this story or watch this movie or read that book. It's a window into other people's worlds, which builds empathy and understanding, and it's incredibly important. Storytelling is how we've progressed from the beginning, and we got to keep going.
I love, like, I agree with everything. Yes. To your inner child, I think I would have been more aware of who I was as a person if I'd seen that storyline more often, if I'd seen gay princesses and that's just that in mainstream media growing up. I remember my first, like, kind of sneakily watching South of Nowhere and Degrassi, like, in my room, and those were like the shows. And again, there wasn't a lot of intersection, there wasn't a lot of BIPOC representation, and how that was even portrayed, like we talk about. It's for the youth. It's so they can see themselves and feel that confident, get that language, educate themselves, and for their allies and other folks to build that empathy. Like Wesley said, it is so incredibly important. My next question is, do you believe that LGBTQ characters should be portrayed by LGBTQ actors and performers, and why? Because we've definitely seen a lot of cis folk and straight folk portray LGBTQ characters, and so I want to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, like the running theme here is we need more representation across the board, and I think that, like, in casting they should always prioritize LGBTQ folks for the roles where that is a part of the story. Like, I feel like even recent films like Dallas Buyers Club or The Danish Girl will 10 years from now be looked back on, and it'll be a similar situation as like blackface, where we're like, why didn't we give the folks who actually live these experiences the opportunity to portray themselves, So yeah, it's important not only for the like genuinity of the stories, but for for everybody to be able to see themselves like represented in media.
I can totally see the need to have an LGBTQ person present, but an actor's job is to be authentic and to portray a role. So as a drag queen actor, I wouldn't want to only play gay roles. So to say that they have to only hire LGBTQ people to play LGBTQ roles means that I am only allowed to play LGBTQ roles, and I don't think that that's okay. I do definitely think that if they're going to play a role, they should be referencing someone and have someone who's actually lived the lifestyle be present, and that person should be credited just as high as the actor or actress who's doing the role. I've watched a number of interviews where Dominique Jackson, Electra from Pose, has talked about this very subject, and she said she doesn't want to be typecast and only play trans women. She wants to play women. So, you know, it just wouldn't make any sense to not allow someone to play these roles who that's their job. Now, when it comes to like biopics, documentaries, those sorts of things, I actually think that a gay person should be present. But when it comes to like comedy, slapstick, any of that, I think that anybody can definitely play those roles, and there doesn't have to be an LGBTQ reference. Yeah.
To piggyback off that, I completely agree that anybody should be able to represent and like play these roles, but I don't think we're there yet. Like, because they're like I guess when it comes to like representing our communities, like we should of course have people who are within it. I feel like we should be able to have like a cis actor like be able to explore the realms of being of like transsexuality or whatnot, but I don't think that we're to the point yet where like actual trans actors are able to get roles as women or as anyone even. Like we should be prioritizing those folks when it comes to especially biopics and whatnot. But I would like to see us in a place where that shouldn't have to come up in casting, but I feel like at least where we're at now, it should still, or like at least have someone in the room and have someone prioritizing the genuinity.
Yeah, I think from what I'm hearing, it's like this relationship with cis actors and queer roles and queer people and non-queer roles, right? We have this kind of unspoken power dynamic right now where queer people, LGBTQ people are not in control of narratives and casting to the extent that they should be. And so right now, I personally err on the side of if it's a queer role, a queer person should be playing it, because the power dynamic in Hollywood or in media is not fair playing ground yet. We're at a deficit of representation, of authentic representation. And cis people clearly, from how they've portrayed queers in the past or continue to grab roles or audition for roles that are not for them, shows that they still have learning to do on their end within the industry on how to educate themselves properly on the LGBTQ experience before they should attempt to portray that. And I think we need to see that education level up, and we need to see access to those roles for actual LGBTQ actors and actresses also meet that same standard. I agree that no one should be forced to only portray roles that are of their own lived experiences, because it's true, acting is about going into the imagination, becoming something you're not, someone you're not, and creating a new life out of that, right? And everyone should have the right to do that. However, yeah, Raja, to your point, I definitely agree that for now, it feels like too much education needs to be done on the cis creator side of things before they can approach these very robust characters with like the understanding that they need to. But that's the joy of media and acting, is that we get a chance to learn and create and become something new and grow from the characters that we get to play. So I'm excited for both, but I would definitely love to see education and roles for queer people increase before we, allow them to continue to dominate the narrative of our stories.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what everyone's saying. I have a background in the theater. I've worked in the theater for 20 years. My answer is kind of like, I think it's a case-by-case basis, actually. I agree with what Henry's saying. I think it becomes super problematic to be like, okay, well, are you checking this box with this lived experience before you can play this part? And then it starts to become a little bit of a pigeonhole. And, you know, it also, you know, Hollywood is still, there's still a ton of closeted people in Hollywood. And I also am not, I err a little bit more on the side of like, you know, if you're closeted, I have a little bit more like grace for you. I'm not one of those people that's like, everyone must come out right now. I don't know. I certainly think that the story being told needs to be told in an authentic way. So a lot of times that can mean that, yeah, you need to have someone that can have a window into that experience. And that can be done with dramaturgs, with directors, with writers, in a lot of different ways. And I think focusing on just the one person playing it is a misstep.
I was gonna say too, though, that because the only person that comes to mind is what's her name that just did. She played a trans person. Yeah, Scarlett Johansson. Because mainstream actors play these roles, it opens up a whole dialogue, and it brings a lot of visibility to it as well. So like, again, there's that relationship of give and take where it's like, yes, it can be played by a gay person, but if Scarlett Johansson plays the character, and now not only do we know what non-binary, gender fluid, that becomes part of the mainstream conversation, it's like, we have to give a little bit in order to progress the entire, you know, humanity.
I've actually been enjoying season 2 of Pose and the exploration of Madonna and the Vogue song and like all of that, and just the complicated relationship. And Henry, you talked about it a little bit. And I think that this season has been really interesting in how it's explored how culture is represented and appropriated and repackaged in the media, and how it can be a really great thing and a really bad thing and a really hurtful thing. And it can also progress, and it can be good, and it can give you new opportunities. So it's really one of those like, yes, and all of these things. And I believe, didn't Scarlett Johansson end up, I think that she actually turned down the role in the end, right? Because people were upset that she was going to play a trans character. Yeah.
And similarly, also Halle Berry got some kickback for even looking at a script to play a trans character. I really do see all of your points. I think, you know, I resonates with me what Henry said about actors act, and, you know, no one wants to be typecasted. So if we do it based off life experience, you know, we don't want to just pigeonhole trans actors to play trans characters. And we want the education and the knowledge and the authenticity, so these stories are told accurately, just like Bree and Raja discussed. And so I think all of these points, because there is a really, like Bree talked about, a really unfair power dynamic in Hollywood. And that is also why a lot of actors and people haven't come out, because they believe it's going to be a negative impact on their career. Why is that? And looking at that root cause. So it is really, I think, a case-by-case basis, like that was mentioned. So thank you so much. I have one last question for all of you. And, you know, we've touched on this a little bit in this throughout this conversation. I want to know what types of LGBTQ representation you would like to see in the media going forward. What changes do you think that need to happen in order for those hopes to become a reality?
Yeah, like I've been saying, I guess, I would like to see more variety in the kinds of stories that have opportunities for intersectionality within acting and behind the scenes. Like, why can't we have a whip-wielding archaeologist that fights Nazis that's trans and things like that, you know?
For me, I would like to see more depth in these roles and more investigation done into the position that gay LGBTQ people played in history. The more research that I do and the more things that I uncover, there's always a gay person present in the room that is helping to dictate what's going on in history. So I would like to see the, what is the word? Not accountability, but the visibility of the gay people of the past, and those stories be told a lot more, because I think that that'll help us get away from the stereotype of, oh, gay people are this, because again, that's that good old boys definition of who gay is, when in fact, you know, gay people were in the room when the Declaration of Independence was signed. So we need to tell that story as well.
Yes, 100% agree with that completely. We definitely need to make sure people recognize gay contribution to all of human history because we've been here from the beginning. I think, you know, I'm a behind the scenes person myself. So as far as what I would like to see changing in media would be more people joining me behind the scenes. You know, I realized recently I had the opportunity to do a little behind the scenes for a Friday the 13th fan film that got filmed in Seattle partially. And I realized, you know, shortly after we wrapped that, you know, I was the only girl of color on the set, you know, one of like 4 women. And I was definitely the only like Puerto Rican, you know, brown person there. And you know, having those moments of realization are always so weird. And the times that I have them, I'm like, dang, like I really was the only one on that set repping POC, you know, consistently. And it would, when I'm on sets that have more people of color, women, non-binary people, LGBTQ people, the vibe and the safety of the atmosphere and like the love, I don't know, it's just a completely different experience than the more cis-het sets that I've had to work on. And, you know, I want to be a part of creating more spaces like that and bringing more LGBTQ people into the filmmaking process, media making process, because we need you here behind the cameras with us. We need you writing the stories. We need you, you know, being the characters. We need you doing the costuming. You know, these are the places we need people. And I just can't wait to continue to cultivate that group with BeautyBoiz and, you know, beyond.
Yes. Oh, Henry, yeah, go ahead.
I didn't want to cut you off, but I also wanted to just add on, Brie, that was so beautiful what you just said. I also think we're living in a time now where it's okay to use your voice, right? Like previously to this, I didn't feel as accepted or whatever when I was using my voice, so I didn't interject. So we what Brie is saying is like, your voice is important as well. So show up to the table and use it. Oh, I just got so electrified by what you said, Brie. Thank you so much.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, show up to the table. And you know, for all the white folks that are in positions of power, make room at the table. That's extremely important. And you know, we can't have this like wash our hands sort of like, well, you know, I'm just gonna quit because I need to be making room. It's like, well, no, actually, you need to be actively making room, not just like throwing your hands up because you don't know what to do. Like, have some education, make some space, and share your knowledge. And, you know, in terms of what I'd like to see in the media, I you know, I kind of like mirror what everyone says, but I would really love to see characters with more depth and exploration of more intersectional you know, things that are going on. I'm in a biracial relationship. My husband's Black and I'm white, and I just think about the conversations that we have and the family that we have and the experiences that we go through. And to me, they're extremely interesting, and I've learned, you know, so much, and we have that, and it's not really ever portrayed that much. So anytime I see a biracial couple, I'm always like, ooh, so that makes me happy.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, I was also touched by what Bree said. I love what all of you said and what all of you have shared here today. I think it's so important to just share the different perspectives, the different views. It's powerful. And this is where we start. And this is where we keep going forward. And like Bree said, you know, we show up. And like Wesley said, we hope that, you know, white folk and people in power can make the room at the table for us to show up as our authentic selves and contribute what we have, because we have some really powerful stories to share. So thank you all for sharing your experiences and your stories today. I will definitely make sure that all social medias are down below. And please follow Queers Converse on Instagram, on YouTube. We hope that we'll be conversing with you soon. Thank you so much.